Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Streaming Alchemy. I'm John Mahoney, and on today's show, we're going to take our first look at scripting with Vmix 27 beta. And specifically, we're going to look at a way that you can use the dials on a Stream Deck Plus to control data rows inside of Data Source Manager. So before we get into that, I want to just invite everybody, please, as always, if you have any questions or any comments, just post them in the comments and we'll get to them live on air so we can make this as interactive as possible. Also, if you'd like to call in and join us live on air, we have the link in the show notes, the link down here, and that should get you set up from somebody in the studio to join us here on the show. Okay, so let me dive in here, and we can actually just show you what I'd like to, go through today. So I have this set up where I have a title with a set of data rows tied to the title, to the elements in the title, and I have a Stream Deck Plus here. So what I'm going to do is make sure my script is starting. And now when I turn this knob, you'll see that I can jump through all of the different rows that I have in my data source and essentially flip through the graphics that I have. And this gives you an easy way now to go through sort of large data sets fairly easily. You can do large turns to sort of jump way ahead or way behind, and then just do the individual clicks to move one by one to find the person that you'd want to display on screen. So that's what we're going to cover today. So in order to do that, there's a few things. So I want to jump first into our Vmix preset. So I'll sort of go through how I have this set up, and then we'll sort of dig a little more into the scripting. So the basic model that we're using for this is Vmix 27 now provides shortcuts to manipulate a layer's position, crop, zoom, all of those elements on a layer on top of an input. This is new in 27 beta. And they also have given you the ability to leverage a Stream Deck Plus, the knobs on a Stream Deck Plus, to make adjustments to these values that you'd use to control the layers. So what we want to do is we want to take the X position of the layer that's on one of our inputs and use that through scripting to select a data source row. And that's the basic model that we're using for all of this. But to do that, we had to set up a few things here. So going through this, I just have an image set up here as my first input. And on that image, I put this second input as a layer. So my layer 1 is my second input here. And that's just text, which says value layer. So what I'm doing is I am taking the X position of this value layer, which you see sort of overlaid up here. So when I move that, I'm taking that X position and using that to do other things downstream. So that's one layer that we have set up here. I have a second layer set up, which just says what number have I dialed in as a player. So if I want to sort of run through, I have 100 different players, been turning this dial, I can see right here which number row of data that I'm actually on. So that just gives me a little feedback. But I set that up so the first three inputs are all about just managing where I select. And the fourth input here is just a GT title, which has data mapped to it. The data that we have, let me sort of switch over here to this other side. The data that we're bringing in for this is just an XML file with a roster, which has players and a whole set of player attributes, school, positions, current team, height, weight, number, all of that. And we also have a URI, which points to their image, which we just have stored on our local disk here. But that could also be a URL if you had that stored in the cloud. And so for this, we have a full set of 8 players. It's a small data set for multiple teams, but this is what I had available to pull together for this. So this is all we've done. We've set something up, and we have a roster with a whole set of players as elements that we've set up here. And in the data source manager, if I come back to here and go to data sources manager, this is exactly what we're pulling out, each one of the data rows. And in settings, the way we got there is I pick the name of this data source as players, and this is the location of the XML file for that. And this is the XPath we're using. So it's just roster/players. So it's very straightforward. We're just going in and basically taking those first two elements inside. So we go from the root element to one of the child elements, and that's it. So we are now getting a list of all of the player elements, and that's what you see laid out here. And to do this, then, we are just using the title editor, and we're mapping all of these. So the player full name is just mapped to a data source. And I'm taking whatever row is selected as the source of that data. So again, very straightforward setup here. The only difference is we're going to use scripting now to manipulate the data source based on the layer position. So before I jump into that, let me just see. We have a few comments that have come in. So let's see. I think we have JP. So he's telling us it's 9 p.m. in South Africa. So I know this. We had a few comments before. There was a time change in the U.S. We always do sort of go off of daylight savings time during the winter, then go back on it during the summer months, the spring months. So that shifts hours here. So I know that impacts the viewing time for people in a lot of different locations globally. So I do apologize. It can be incredibly confusing, but JP, I'm glad with the time shifts and everything you're able to join us. So thank you. So I have Michael. Hi, Michael. How are you? How long ago did the show start? Yeah, so again, this is part of the confusion. We started at 2 p.m. out time, so that may be for some of you an hour later than normal. So, but you are here. The show just started, so we've sort of been into it for about 10 minutes. So, Samuel, greetings. Thank you for joining us from Norway. I appreciate it. Okay, so let's dive into the meat of this here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up the script file, and we're just going to, actually the XML, we're going to start here. So one of the things that we're looking for now is there is an X position and, zoom and Y position, all of those things are now made available inside of the Vmix XML for us to pick on. So in our first input, so we have, if you see Vmix, inputs, and input number 1, that's the one where it's just titled value capture. So that's sort of our bottom layer, our base layer. So that's just set up. You then have this next element in the XML, which was your traditional, this is what was there normally. And so you had an overlay which basically said what input, using an input key, what input is stored on what layer inside of our input. So on input 1, we have, this is basically input 2 as our first layer here. And this is the second layer is input 3, which is what we have here. But now there's additional information right over here that wasn't there before. And this is the information about the X and Y values. And if you'll notice, these are the values that we're going to be pulling off of the XML, the X value specifically. But you could use X and Y or other things that you could use to sort of grab data out of the system. but we're using the X in this case. Now, I want to show things. So we're going to stay over here. What I'm going to do is I'm going to reset the layer on my first row here. I'm going to set this back to 0. So give me a second here. Okay, so I just set this back so it's at 0. And this is because it's an important thing that we're going to have to handle inside of scripting. If you notice here, we have this set up here, which was our X and Y that we just talked about. If I refresh this now, let's see, did I not get it? Well, I must have done something, but you can lose this X and Y position. So you need to make sure that when you set this up, that you have an X and Y position that's available. So I probably did something. Yeah, let me go with that. That was it. Sorry, I forgot to reset one of the values. So if I loop this again, you'll now see that it's still there. So never mind, because it's saying X is 1. So if X goes to 0, I won't keep belaboring trying to do this. If X goes to 0, this row can go. Oh, I'm sorry. I have my script running. So it keeps changing things for me. So this is my problem here. Sorry. So let me just reset this all one more time. And there we go. And now when I throw this, you now see that, yes, okay. If my brain worked, it always works better that way. So now you can see I had the overlay information, but none of the positional information. Even though it's at a position 0, X is 0, I don't have that. But if I were to go and change this then, like when I do this, I'll just start this and that should get me going. So when you come here now, once I start this up, you now see that it does set this back once I have everything set. So this is how we have to handle that in the scripting. So I apologize that took so long, but that was my problem. But this is important. So let me push this to the side here, and we'll dig into the scripting next. So the way we're doing this is it's pretty standard for all the stuff we've done on former XML shows. So we have all of that. So going through here, we set everything up to pull in XML nodes, where we are just going to take and read the input node with the X and Y position, and we'll get to that. And then we just pull the values out. So I have my input value X, and then if I need to convert that some way as an index, it's the index into the data set, I'm using that. And the value rows just says, how many rows of data do I have? Because one of the things we'd want to do is make sure when you turn the knob on the Stream Deck Plus that you're not like shooting way above the values that you have or way below. So we have to sort of clamp these to say the lowest value I can have is my lowest data row, 1, and the highest value is my highest data row. So in this case, that's 8, but that's how we would be working that. So we use that to make sure we can clamp everything. And then this is, just a node we set up for all of the players here. So we have the player nodes. That's where we're pulling all those ones that are marked player. That's a list of those nodes. So to get started, what we're going to do is we're going to open the XML file with the roster. And we're doing this to basically get the number of rows because we need that. We also opened it in Data Source Manager. So that's how we're pulling it and using it to populate our title. But we're using this to know how many rows we have. So things that we've covered before, but we are declaring this as a file stream, and we are opening the XML file. We are loading that into the roster XML. And if you remember, the roster XML that we set up here is a XML document that we defined in the system. So now we have that information coming into the system. And what I'm saying is now create a node list with all of the player nodes inside that XML file that we opened. And so from there, I say, how many roles are there? So we look at the player nodes, which is our XML node list, and we say count, which is the number of rows inside of an XML node list, and the number of nodes, actually. And that gives us how many rows we have. So that's just grabbing that information and creating our minimum and maximums that we need. From there, and this is because I mentioned, you need to make sure that your value inside of the XML, your X value is set at something that's not 0. So that XML flag for overlay with the position information is actually available, because that only appears once you have a non-zero value that you're dealing with. So we are going to take and basically in this API function, we're going to set the value to -1. So it's like putting it to a non-valid default value, and then let our scripting that we loop through make sure that gets set correctly. So that's what we're doing here. We're just setting set layer 1x position. And this is one of the new shortcut sets available. They have it for layer 1 to layer 10, and it's just this part of the name changes. That 1 there changes to whatever value you want. And they have for X and Y, and you can do zoom and crops all very similarly. So we're just taking that first input that's called value capture, and we're setting the position, the X position of layer 1. And now we start to loop. And this is basically all that's going to happen in the background. So we're reading our XML from Vmix. So this is the state of everything. And what I'm doing here is I am pulling out, let me see if I do wrap for this, make this a little easier. So this here is basically saying I want to grab a node which has this XPath out of my XML file. And we did a whole show on XPaths. So this is slightly more complex than we did there, but I'm just going through the XML and saying for the input that's named value capture, and the overlay in that input that is index 0, because Vmix has like 0 reference and 1 reference. The overlays that you have, your layers, start at 0 inside of Vmix script. So, and I want to pull out the position information. So that's sort of the layer of detail that I have here. So under the input, under the overlay, under the position information, I want to pull that out as an XML node. And that's what we have in the value input parent node now. And so from there, the first thing I'm going to say is if that is not nothing, which is a Visual Basic way of saying if there's something there, if I found it, then let's just take and pull that value because it has a value that I want. And then we're going to turn around and just convert that value, which will be a string, into an integer and save it in input value X. So that's the X value that's there. If it isn't there, which means that, we didn't find it, the value is basically set to 0, then we're going to turn around and say, okay, we're going to force this value to 1 because that's the minimum number of rows you can have. And so we are actually using the API function to force it to the first position. So we're sort of moving it over, but that generates all that XML as well. So we came up here and said, if we have the XML, let's just read it. If we don't, let's force it to be there. And we know when we force it to be there, we're setting it to 1. So that's the first part. The second part we're doing, though, is we're coming in saying, if the value that we have for X is the same as the one that we already have for index plus 1, because we're sort of shifted off by 1 with the X being 0-based versus 1-based, then I just sleep and I keep waiting. Because what I'm basically saying here is if nothing has changed, if I haven't turned the knob again and there's no new value sitting there, I don't want to go through all this extra work in the background to, update things. So I'm basically just come back saying, okay, wait for 100 milliseconds, then go back and we'll do the whole process again, everything we've just done. But when we do have something, when there is a change, then I have to start to work with that. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to say, I want to make sure that the value is not sort of less than 1, because anything, if I'm using this as an index through data rows, I'm going from 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on, up. That's how I would index it. So I don't want any negative values, and I don't want 0. So the first thing I'll do is say, if it's less than 1, let's set it to 1. So this will capture that first instance where I came back at the top and said the value is -1. So this will fall through, read that -1 and say, okay, let's initialize that. We're starting off, let's initialize that to 1 and set the index for 1. And then inside of this API function, what I'm doing is, this is an old function, but if you remember on the screen, so let me just switch back to the Vmix screen for a second over here. I have this number sitting here. So this number is basically telling me what row I'm on. And I'm using that more as a visual reference. So if I'm doing something in a production, I could see that number there sort of clearly, even if it's down in the small inputs here. And that just makes it easier for me to see. But now if I go through here, that just updates that. So this is doing a direct update to my title file. So the title, I'm doing set text in the title. The title input is selection layer. The name of the element inside my GT title is selection, and it's a text field, so selection.text. And this is the value I want to put in it. So this is stuff we covered with probably mid-season on working with titles and changing values directly in titles. So this is basically making sure that if we were less than 1, everything was set, and we have that reflected on screen. And the other piece is that X shouldn't be bigger than the largest value that we have. So if I come through here and look and say, we have value rows, and if you remember, that's why we read that XML file at the beginning. We came back and said, what's our largest value? And in this case, that was stored in value rows. So if the X input that we read, if I turn the knob and I jumped way past the highest value I have, this comes back and says, okay, we went too far. Let's force everything back to the maximum value. So it stays between 1 and our maximum value. And we're doing the exact same thing, updating all of that, showing it on the screen to our maximum value. And so that basically sort of handles all of the scenarios we need. And now what we effectively have is a knob on a control surface that we can turn to generate a number between 1 and, in this case, 1920, I believe, is the largest number you'd get positively for this, which would sort of slide something fully off the screen. So that is sort of our core element here. We now have a value that we generated using a knob on a control surface, and we're going to leverage that now. So with that value there, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say, since data sources are 0 indexed, I'm just going to say set my value index to the X minus 1, because the X will start at 1, data sources are start at 0. And I'm using my API function to say data source select row. And I'm basically saying here's the XML table that I have set up in my data sources manager. And this is the value, the index of the element that I want. And then again, I just do that same thing for my on-screen display of which element I'm at. That's it. But it's incredibly powerful now because I have this as a generic tool. Anything that I wanted to do up here, I could just turn around and say, gee, I'm not going to read XML. I just want a value between 1 and 25. Set your value, your max, your value rows to 25 and say, okay, now I have a max value of 25. And this utility now will generate a value between 1 and 25 that I could use for any other functionality that I wanted. And that's the real power now, because not only do I have this for a single variable like X, but I could do X and Y. I could do it on multiple layers. So I really now, using these Stream Deck Plus knobs, I have a granular control that I can use anytime I need to just leverage a value inside of a script. I don't have to, like before I did things with a keypad, if you remember, where you press one button and it's times 10 and your second button is 0, that sort of thing. You don't have to do that now. This gives you the ability to just dial to whatever you want. So if you have a roster with 50 players on it, you can just turn a dial and move between those 50 players. But it could be any data set you want, any control elements you want to display on screen. Position, colors, any of that stuff. You now can do all that. and do it all in scripting. So I know this wasn't the longest show in terms of this, but let me sort of jump in. I think we have a few more comments here. So let's see. 9LT happens. So for all of us, kind of glad to see it can happen. Except, yep. So that's So that's one of those things. That I deal with this. And I apologize. Sometimes I just get caught up in what I want to show and I forget settings. So thank you for being understanding, Michael. I appreciate that. So let's see. So Michael's also asking about the sensitivity on the knob in a Stream Deck. So a few things about the Stream Deck as a control surface. These knobs here have a click. So each click you can feel as you turn. So that you get that sort of tactile feedback around the clicks here. It is fairly sensitive, so it's not a hard lock, but you do feel it is a definite détente in there where you're feeling it click and stop, but there's not a lot of resistance, so you can slide through it. It is not a very large movement needed to get that click. So it does require a little bit of fine control if you just want to jump through this way. But if the way I look at this would be the sort of thing where if I wanted to jump really fast, I could turn to something and then do that sort of roughly to get to the area I want and then dial in exactly how I'd want to do this. So that's the other thing is these dials are infinite dials. So they don't have a start point and an end point. So the fact that I reset things to say, okay, even though I turned way beyond my maximum, I'm forcing it back to my maximum row. You get that sort of automatically now because I push it back and there is no start and stop. So it's not like I've misaligned the dial now. It's just, I just keep turning either direction. So that's the other piece to this. It makes it, fairly easy. The other thing, though, about the knobs, if I switch back to the Vmix screen here, let me sort of jump in here, and you can see the Vmix interface. I have, in looking at the button here, so if, let me see if I get the bottom screen over. Yeah, so with the button here, if I press this button, I can have it do other actions. So even though I have this as a turnable knob, the knob itself also can be mapped to have a action on a button press. So that gives you a secondary thing. And inside of the Stream Deck software, you can turn around and effectively create a function stack. So when I press this button, as opposed to triggering an action inside of Vmix, what I can do is I can say, make this button here, so every time I press it, a stack, a button stack. And I can then, on each layer of the stack, say I want to put a Vmix function here, and then I want to put another one there. So when I press this, it'll cycle through my stack. So I could turn around and say, my first is to change the X, and then I press it, and that will be to change the Y. And then I press it again, and that will be to adjust my zoom. So things of that sort now are also possible with these buttons. So there's multiple dimensions to how these work. Fairly sensitive, but they do have a hard feel. There's a click every time you do it. So it's not just going to be a sort of slide without any sort of feedback. Okay. So let's see. We have a few others here. Tom is saying, what about us displaying the value above the knob on the Stream Deck? I have not figured out. I would like to actually do that. That was my original thinking, if there was a way to do that. I just didn't see it, and I didn't have enough time to sort of investigate thoroughly. But that would be ideal. So you could just look at that and you know exactly where you are. I don't know if that's possible, but it may be. So I mean, I'll look into that more because I do see how that would be hugely valuable, especially if you had multiple knobs. Where you said, "Gee, I want to have one knob for X, one knob for Y," and you just see exactly where you have those set. So, Marco's saying he forgot about the clocks going back. Yeah, so I think I said when I posted, I said they went forward, but you understood what I meant. So I'm thinking that the hour got pushed forward. So yes, the clocks did go, and that in a global society, I'm not sure why we don't all globally agree on a time standard. We all can sort of lock into that, but unfortunately, that's not the way the world works. So I apologize for the confusion that can cause. Okay, so I think that sort of covers what I wanted to handle today. I am not sure because next week in the United States is sort of Thanksgiving on Thursday. So I'm not sure whether we'll have a show. I'll let everybody know probably by Wednesday whether we will have a show or not. But if we don't, we'll have a show the following Friday. But I'll let everybody know. So why don't we switch over to our post-show hangout? And, if you can join us there, that would be great. Happy to talk about anything you'd like to. Everything from this show, other shows, anything about Vmix, TriCaster, whatever you'd like. If you can join us, that's great. If you can't, I will see you on the next show. Not sure whether it's this Friday, but if it is, if it isn't, I'll see you in 2 weeks. And I wish everybody a very happy Thanksgiving if you are here in the U.S. and celebrate that holiday. So, see you in the post show or see you next show. Take care. All right, everybody, welcome back. So this is one of those shows where I was thinking about, Vmix 27 and the beta and what's going on. We haven't really been using it over here. And again, I'm sort of wait for things to mature a bit before I tend to use them, for something show-based. But this was something where I've seen, there's tons of videos out there now where people have sort of gone over all the features and everything. But I figured what I wanted to do for my first 27 beta show was really think about what opportunities the new features can open up to us, especially from a scripting and automation side. And this seemed like a nice, easy win where I now have control of a value. And that's something that would be, really useful in so many circumstances. So that was what sort of motivated this show. So Tom is saying here, he's asking if I'm using Bitfocus Companion for this. I am not. What I have here is basically just the standard Stream Deck software. So let me see if I can just call this up here because it's. So yeah, so I have that sort of sitting over here. Let me sort of put this down so it's a little clearer what I'm doing here. So we just have this set up where I've taken and assigned the Vmix to these 3 buttons here. And so if you look the way I have this set up, I just pulled a simple image in for this. So that's all I did. I just showed an image file. And I have it set up to say this is going to be my player selection. And this then just becomes, as a knob or as a push button, something I can use for this. The other piece that I did mention, this again, you can do fairly directly. If I want to do something with any one of these buttons here, so let me sort of turn Vmix off. I can actually do what's called a dial stack here. So if I drag this dial stack here, this is what I mentioned. I now could take and say, I want to put a whole bunch of Vmix shortcuts on this dial. And just so you can sort of see this, I can say I want this to be my X position. I want this one to be my Y position. And I want this one to be my, let me set this here to Y position. And then I'll just say this is my zoom. So with these 3 buttons in here now, if let me switch to the Stream Deck here on the desk here. So now that I've done this, you can see that, sort of do this where it might be clearer. You can see right here, it just says X position. So if I click the button, it now goes Y position and now goes zoom. So that dial stack lets me move through 3 different Vmix commands that I could then use and adjust with this knob. So as opposed to using the button push of the knob as a Vmix to trigger a Vmix shortcut, I'm telling the Stream Deck by the button push to switch between the layers in the dial stack, and then each one layer in that dial stack is a Vmix command. So that would give me this sort of flexibility to do that. So hopefully that makes sense, but that's is all being done right now on with Stream Deck software. I'm going to definitely look more into central control, into companion, and see what else we can do with the Stream Deck Plus as part of everything we do here. We've really just been using it to control lights and audio levels here in the studio. So we haven't really done a deep dive into that, but that may be a good future show. Okay. So Michael is saying, I read in another Facebook group about doing multiple commentary from Vmix. I get you can have it to 3 different streams, but how to do in a way more like 10 languages in the same stream? Okay, this is interesting question. So let me sort of see what I can. Sorry, let me get out of this. Give me a second here. Yeah. So if I go over to my Vmix over here. So inside, I don't have any real audio sources set up here, but you can have multi-channel audio set up inside of Vmix. And let me see if I can add something that would be a sound file. I don't know what I have, but I just want to. Okay, I'm just see if I can just add an audio device here. Okay. I was taking add this as a Dante audio. So I have this here. So now you can see I've added a new source. And if you come here, you can actually see in the channel mixer, right now I have 2 channels. But if I had a different type of audio device, so something like a multi-channel audio device that I have plugged in here, you could see these all as individual channels that you could set up. And I then could route audio to these different channels just by sort of saying, that would be the channel matrix here, where I would say, when I have audio coming in from each one of my buses, which channels do I want to route it to? So here, right now, you can see my bus A gets channel 1 of audio, and my bus A left, and my bus A right gets channel 2. If this were 6-channel or 8-channel or 10-channel audio device, you would have the ability to say, I want channels 1 and 2 to be sourced by bus A left and bus A right. I want channels 3 and 4 to be bus B left and bus B right, and so on. So you would then route the separate audio to the different buses, and you would route in the channel matrix these buses over to the specific audio outputs that you want on that audio device. So hopefully that makes sense, but because I don't have everything set up to sort of show that with multi-channel, but this will reflect all of the channels on whatever audio device you pick. And some of those could be things like Dante or NDI or other things where you can have multiple audio channels available through that. So hopefully that made sense. So yeah, and follow up. I mean, if you need any more on that, I can try to, I can try to give you a little more detail. But that, I think, gives you the general mechanism for it. So let's see. Do we have anything else here? No. All right. So I guess we're probably done here. If there are any other questions, get them in. But a few things I just wanted to talk about. I'm going to try to do a bit more with scripting and Vmix 27 beta. There's a few more ideas I have. If there are other show topics around the beta that you'd like us to dig into, happy to do that as well. So just sort of post them in the comments, post them in the Facebook group, and we'll try to get that onto our list. But we're trying to sort of bridge the transition, so we don't want to do everything that's all about 27 for people that are still using 26. We want to make sure we do shows that address some of the things that they can do as well. So yeah, Michael, I think maybe this could be actually another good show to do, to really talk about multi-channel audio in your specific use case. So let's see if I can pull that together. Maybe we'll try to do that as a quick show at some point and see if we can get to that. So thanks, sir. That's actually a good suggestion. So let's see. We have. So Michael's saying, I have Dante. That's another show. How to set up, use Dante software to channel audio to Vmix. Okay, I'm just making notes of these here. So okay, thank you. So Tom, he's saying he has a sound device is Mix Pre 10 that gives me how to input audio using Osio. Yeah, so Osio gives you a lot. Dante gives you a lot. I mean, in Dante with Osio, a Dante virtual sound card, I think you can actually do 32 audio channel pairs out of that and set that up in different ways. So there are definitely some cool things there. There are things like BirdDog has a NDI to Dante translator app that lets you set up your channels as either sort of a single multi-channel feed or multiple single channel feeds. So lots of different things to do with that. But this clearly is something that probably could make an interesting show. So I appreciate the feedback on this. That's added to the list. So thank you everyone for that. All right. So I think slightly shorter show this week, but I think we're going to probably call it a wrap for the show. Thank you all for joining. Thank you all for hanging out in the post show. I definitely appreciate that as well. So until our next show, either next Friday or the Friday after, please everybody be safe, be well. And also, if you are in the US and are celebrating Thanksgiving next week, have a great one. Enjoy family and friends. That's one of those blessings that we definitely need to take the time to appreciate. So Michael's saying he just bought 2 Dante sound drivers and 2 commentary boxes. So you can do a lot with Dante. So let me look into that and I'll see the different options to try to do a show which covers a hybrid of some of the Dante stuff as well as multi-channel. So, all right, everyone. Thank you. Be well, be safe, take care.